So what I will do is give you an introduction into the command and control work that we are currently doing in Allied Command Transformation. And you heard General Messier talk about that this morning. So first of all, a little perspective on the approach. If you look at command and control, clearly, and this is true for every one of our topics, there's a challenge today. You heard about the changing security environment. You heard about the emerging threats. We need to deal with the challenges we have today. So we have no choice but to look for mitigations near term in terms of command and control. Second of all, of course, we want to articulate a vision. Where do we want to go? And this is sort of the crystal ball. In this particular slide, I'm showing 2030. I fully agree with the Amazon representative this morning. It is absolutely ridiculous to think about 2030 in this particular space. I can barely imagine what 2020 will look like. If I go back the same amount of time, 14 years, did anybody believe we would have this in our pockets and that we could do what we do today? And so 2030 is really a synonym for over the horizon. It is beyond today and tomorrow, but it's not that far away. The reason we focus on this is we want to make sure that what we do today actually goes in a certain direction. And then the third piece is, how do we connect those two? How do we connect today's legacy to the implementation of tomorrow's vision? So these are the three areas that ACT is working on. From a scope perspective, we always get the question, where are you focusing? Well, we focus on three things. You see the classic pyramid here that shows you the hierarchy from the highest political level to the lowest tactical level. And then you see the words on the left-hand side that we associate with this. You know, whether it's a NATO command structure, the NATO force structure, working with partners or nations. We look at this pyramid through three different lenses. And let me start on the right-hand side. Because the biggest lens is actually the federated lens. Because in modern missions, we will work with entities far broader than the 28, soon 29 NATO nations. In Afghanistan, at one point, we had 48 nations, plus a bunch of international organizations. That is the norm. So in the federated space, and looking through that federated lens, interoperability is the key. That's what we're focusing on. We're not telling people what to buy. We're not telling people how to build it. We're not telling people how to organize themselves. We're trying to agree with people on how we can work together from a people, process, and technology perspective. The second lens is the NATO lens at 28. You heard about the NATO defense planning process this morning. Well, that's about how much. Because the NATO nations, amongst themselves, apportion in that step 3 of NDPP what is required for the level of ambition we have. Well, a significant amount of the things we apportion have to do with command and control. So we need to deal with that. And the third lens, which is the smallest lens, but very important for those people who make investments or capitalize on investment, is what NATO itself is going to use. And these are NATO's own organic capabilities that we implement through NSIP. So we look at this through three lenses: the interoperability lens for federation, the apportionment lens for the alliance, and the acquisition lens and implementation lens for NATO itself. So today I'm only going to focus on the future, because this is the Chiefs of Transformation Conference. So when looking at the future, how do we know what the future looks like? Well, we consulted two publications. First of all, the Strategic Foresight Analysis that tries to predict what the planet will look like from a political, human, economic, and technological perspective in 2030. So this particular publication is about 2 years old. We used it as our baseline, and by the way, it's being updated as we speak. And it was ACT working with academics and government institutions in North America and in Europe to try to get a consensus view of what the future looks like. The second thing that drove our vision for command and control was the framework for future alliance operations. And this tries to look at the military implications of that future world. It's organized by themes, and it lines up with the defense planning structures as well. I'm not going to dwell on each of these words, and you see hyperlinks at the bottom, so you can always go back and look at these publications. But they were a very helpful instrument for us to look at the forecast for the future. But as always, before you look at the future, you got to look at the past, because you can learn. So, quick history lesson. When I joined the armed forces in 1981 and got into NATO in about 1982, The NATO command structure was about 30,000 plus. I got involved in my first exercise, and it was called Reforger, where over 100,000 troops would be transported from North America to Europe. Those were the NATO days. It was the height of the Cold War. We were massive, we were strong. Well, the Cold War ended, and we shrunk our NATO command structure to about 13,000, and then a little later we shrunk it more to the 8,800 we are today. Well, why did we do that? Well, we cashed in on the peace dividend. But all of a sudden we find ourselves in a place where the three core tasks of NATO all have to be addressed again. And we're sitting here with 8,800 people in the NATO command structure. What are we going to do about this? Do we adjust our ambition? Or do we pursue option one? We'll just make NATO bigger again. We did it before. We can make NATO 35,000 strong again. We can have a new reforger, bring 100,000 troops in. That will make Europe very safe. But obviously this option is not very realistic. We do not have the money for this option, and we probably do not have the political will. So it's most likely we have to pursue option two. And that is to work together with the nations, with the partners, with industry and academia. We're all in this together. And so the notion of federating, sharing information, and then winning in a new way is probably going to be something we're going to do. How do we do that? Well, a lot of us throw the acronym .lmlpfi around. And it's a fairly complex construct, and it leads to very long discussions because you have so many letters. So let me take a simpler way of describing a capability and simply say any capability is a balanced combination of people, processes, and technology. Not just technology, people, processes, and technology. And let me look at each of these individually. So this morning you already heard that technologically speaking, we no longer have the assumed dominance. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was normal to have technology originate in the military domain. That's no longer true. And if I look at command and control as three major processes, collecting, decision-making, and effecting, underpinned by collecting, I can do a quick assessment of where we are with technology. So let me start with connecting. That is a completely commercial space today. Yeah, sometimes we have a military satellite. Yes, sometimes we still invent some algorithms. But in general, the commercial or the communication space is dominated by industry developments. And we simply have to accept that. Let's look at collecting. Yeah, we have some very military-specific collection capabilities. But wouldn't you agree with me that the Internet of Things is going to be a game changer? And a lot of the collection capabilities are going to be commoditized, and we will use commercial capabilities. So the trend is probably down. What about decision making? Well, decision support tools are very commoditized already, and we probably have to admit we're behind. At home, I have fantastic decision support tools. I whip out my iPhone, I go on 10 different apps, and I know what I have situational awareness. I know what the weather looks like. I know when I'm traveling. I know how late my plane is. I know where my wife is shopping, and I know how much she's spending. I have situational awareness. Now, I can't do anything about the shopping, but that's a different story. So this space is also dominated by commercial technology. And then the last space, the affecting space, yes, we have the bombs. Yes, we have precision munition. But a lot of the other effectors, and take cyber as an example, it is again the industrial space or the non-military space that will be leading. Most of the ideas for cyber offensive capabilities today come from the non-military domain. We might capitalize on them, but there's a trend down as well. Why am I saying this? Well, I think we have to accept that our technology superiority is over. We have technology parity, and we have to find different ways of capitalizing on it. And that's why we have industry sitting here today to help us do that. On the people side, I already made the case that we have far less people now than we ever had. So, yeah, we got to do more with less. So how do we actually make these people more effective? Do we need more training? How do we make the human more effective in order to do what he has to do? Do we have to organize him differently? By the way, did you know that since I joined NATO, we have never removed the level of command? We went from 35,000 to 8,800 with the same number of levels of command. So we squished the pyramid, we didn't shrink it. From a process perspective, we tend to be fairly structured, we think, and then when we go in operation, we become fairly ad hoc. And so we need to find clever ways to improve our processes. Can technology help us? Absolutely. And I think every industry out there has ideas. So basically my plea is that if you want to deal with this, we gotta be smarter. Technology is not going to give us the automatic advantage. And by the way, our acquisition process might even make it a disadvantage because the bad guy can buy it faster than we can. So let's be smarter. We try to articulate an idea, and it's captured in this, this capstone concept summary. This was part of the handout. If you didn't get it, there's a URL at the bottom of these slides that you can download it from. And in that capstone concept, we try to articulate a vision for command and control in the future. And so we believe that command and control needs to be a continuous activity, and I'll come back to that in a second. And if you do it right, it's force multiplying. So 1 + 1 becomes greater than 2. If you don't do command and control right in a multinational environment, it becomes a hindrance. And so we want to network a federation of all the actors you saw on the previous slide. NATO, the organization, the NATO nations, the partners, and any other organization that will be in our space. And we do this so we can achieve the right effects, and we will be ready on day 0 for our missions. How do we do this? Well, we have a well-trained force, we simplify our structures, we create better and distributed processes, and we capitalize on technology in an innovative way. So that's the idea. A different way of looking at this. Where are we today? Well, we live in a pretty connected world. I gave you the example of my iPhone. And all of you have that same iPhone either in your pocket or in your hand at the moment. You're pretty well connected. Well, in our military space, that isn't necessarily true. When I sit at my desk at Allied Command Transformation, I am reasonably connected to the rest of NATO. The moment I step away from my office, I'll lose connectivity. And that's in the static world. In our mission world, we don't create connections until there is a mission. And so we tend to be ad hoc. We only have connectivity when we need it. This has an effect on our collection activities. We tend to collect for ourselves. Every nation has a collection machine, our intel apparatus. And we only share when we think it is necessary. So as a result, there is no common situational awareness, and this is not 100% true, but in general. And one of the reasons is that information sharing is not continuous. We share ad hoc. In Afghanistan, it took us 3 to 4 years to connect properly and to share properly. And by the time we achieved it, we started the operations in Libya, and it took us 3 months to connect and share properly. This is not institutionalized. We have work to do. Our decision-making tends to be very complex, and one of the reasons is we don't have continuous processes. I might not trust the guy that I have to work with tomorrow because I didn't work with him yesterday. I don't have a relationship. I don't have trust. Now, on the effecting side, I think that's the simplest of them all. Effectors are in the hands of nations, and NATO just asks the nations to deliver. So where would we like to be? Well, why don't we connect permanently? Why don't we make a distinction between connecting and sharing? And we connect permanently, and we only ask, do we share or not? Instead of saying, oh, I have to share, now I have to connect first. No, connections are permanently. We can capitalize on industrial trends. We can collect on a permanent basis, but also share on a permanent basis. This is what that cloud of cloud idea is all about. Now, we might not want to share everything, because not every ally has the same relationship with every other ally, but we can do a lot. And if we build permanent relationships, we probably develop trust, and we can make better decisions. So today, one of the focal points will be on the technology in that middle bit. And so, in a big diagram, if you take all these processes, and if everybody starts to think in terms of sharing, clouds, federating, we have a far better chance to outperform the enemy, who can be more agile, as we heard this morning. So how do we implement this? Well, for the 4 major processes, we came up with 12 concepts. So on the collecting side, the idea is, why don't we make the sensor smarter? You can avoid part of your big data problem if you don't collect as much. Collecting noise is not meaningful. You have to process it. So why don't we take the computing capability closer to the sensor instead of taking the data from the sensor all the way to the computing capability? Can we use technology to turn all that raw data into actionable information a little better? We do it in our private lives. I understand the big data challenge in my private life, but I have no problem finding the right flight in a vast database of opportunities. You know, I have the tools to do that. I also have no trouble finding the knowledge I need to do some woodworking in my garage. Why can't we deploy that ourselves? Why can't we share information on a continuous basis? For decision making, you know, what about the human? It's still the human who makes decisions. How do we get information into the brain of humans? Most of our systems are not very ergonomic. They don't help the human answer the questions that they're trying to get answered. Well, let's do something. What about working together? You know, persistent relationships. What about virtual collaboration? There is no business in the world that insists on decision making in the same physical space. Yet in NATO, the NAC has to physically come together to make a decision. Board meetings in the commercial world are virtual half the time or more. On the effecting side, how we're going to deal with cyberspace? How we're going to make sure that our effects are more comprehensive, and can we even take artificial intelligence to the effector edge? And then the last one, how do we bring it all together? Can we create global reach? Can we create this plug-and-play federation of clouds? And can we make the whole thing resilient and safe so we can all trust this constellation? So today, that's one of the areas we're going to focus on. So this is the big picture. These 12 ideas will be worked out over the next year or so. We're looking for collaboration. So if you're willing to help, please follow us. There's this website called Typedia. It is internet accessible. It is password protected. If you do not have an account, go see the man here or in the corner. They can give you a little card and we can get you going. You can see everything we're doing live. We're hiding in plain sight. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over the floor to IBM.